Hello, and welcome to my presentation on ebooks and change management. Ebooks and digital resources are listed as a key issue for the ALA, and while ebooks are not a brand new technology, nor is this a brand new issue for libraries, libraries are still honing the ways to best ensure that these resources are accessible to patrons. So in this presentation, I would like to give a brief background on some of the access issues that first made this a major issue for libraries, and some of the current challenges that ebooks and digital content present to patrons and library staff alike, and finally some of the change management skills that can be used to help mitigate some of these challenges. So first, a little bit of history. As I said, ebooks are certainly not new technology. And most of this has been playing out over the past decade, where libraries have been having quite a tumultuous relationship with major publishers and in trying to acquire equitable access to ebooks. So just a little timeline. In 2007, that was when Amazon first introduced Kindle and Apple first introduced the iPhone. Barnes & Noble followed with Nooks, and iPads followed shortly after. So suddenly we had lots of items on the market that allowed users to access digital ebooks. However, the major publishers saw this as a major threat to their sales, and they tried to find ways to limit sales to libraries. Some of the strategies that were involved the HarperCollins model, which meant that after you purchased the access to the item, you only got 26 downloads, and then you had to repurchase the item. Again, lots of other publishers had issues with the fact that libraries are not end users. It's not a one download, one person situation. You purchase an ebook and you want multiple patrons to be able to access that. So other ways that happened in 2012, Random House greatly increased the prices of ebooks to libraries. But by 2013, due to major lobbying efforts by the ALA, all the major publishing companies were allowing libraries to purchase ebooks, and it was more equitable than it had certainly been in the past. However, that doesn't mean that there aren't plenty of challenges still surrounding ebooks. Digital rights management is now a huge issue for libraries, especially as they're dealing with the fact that often with ebooks, you're not purchasing the ebook itself, you're purchasing access rights. And what happens if you're no longer able to access that material? Libraries are still working on price negotiation with other vendors. They're dealing with patron privacy issues, whether or not individual information is going to be taken by these vendors concerning patron downloading materials. There are also disability issues. You can't simply make a copy of an ebook because, once again, it's not your own personal book that the library has purchased. It's only purchasing the access to it. So there's often limitations about what you can copy. There's also still issues pertaining to awareness of the resources. And while there has been great strides made in this again, there are still plenty of people who do not know that libraries have access to ebooks and can provide that for them. And then finally, the last two challenges I think are especially pertinent to not just library users, but also to library staff, and are important for managers to be aware of. And those are the digital divide and being a part of digital inclusion, which means making sure that not only do people have access to these items, but they're able to use them well. And finally, the constant changing platforms and the possibility that the rules are going to change again with legal rights and other access issues. So this can create quite a bit of stress and chaos surrounding them. So as I said before, libraries have made great strides in ensuring that the public knows that libraries offer these resources. As of 2016, 90% of public libraries had ebook lending programs, and 62% of adults were aware that these programs existed. Ebook readership is up. 2017, according to Pew, 26% of American adults reported reading an ebook, and according to Overdrive, 2017 was a record-breaking year, with over 225 million digital titles downloaded through that particular platform. Some of the reasons for this increase include more device ownership. There are more people who now have items that allow them to access ebooks, and they're not necessarily just dedicated e-readers like Kindles and Nooks initially were, but rather your phone has applications that allow you to do e-reading. And then also age demographics, that there are younger people who are more likely to read a book, whether or not it's print or electronic, and they're also more likely to read ebooks. And so as the millennial generation continues to age and there are more and more adults who are comfortable and have grown up with that kind of technology, they're more likely to use that technology. So once again, I would reiterate that change is not a destination, but rather it's a process, and there's continual change involved with ebooks. These two particular quotations note the fact that implementing change is easy, but then making it stick is entirely different, and you have to continue to put energy and resources into a service if you want it to continue to be up to snuff. So some of the reasons why change management is necessary for ebooks involves the fact that the platforms for which ebooks can be used are constantly changing. For instance, the applications that are used on an iPhone can change. Overdrive this year changed their application to Libby, which was much more user-friendly, but also that means that's a new thing for library staff to learn. If you are familiar with downloading ebooks onto an iPad, you might not be familiar with doing it on a Kindle. All these devices work just a little bit differently, and they all update periodically. So again, that's something that staff have to consider. And Anna Shelton identifies rapidly changing library technology as a source of stress within the workplace. However, she argues that some of the things that can help mitigate this are buy-in to understanding why this is an important service, providing adequate training, and of course communicating with staff about the changes and about the services. So as I mentioned before, that library managers can help mitigate some of these challenges by considering buy-in, again, making sure that library employees are on board with the services and why we're offering them. Managers can assess the needs of staff and identify key team members who are going to be helping patrons with these technologies and helping to build these services and programs for the library and ensuring that they get the training that they need. And of course, once again, communication, and beyond just communicating about the actual how-tos of the situation and how to implement it and what's going to be changing, but also considering the feelings and emotions that staff go through when they're working on something that is in flux. So the first step is buy-in. And again, that refers to the idea that all employees are on board about why a service is being offered and why they're being asked to work on these projects. And remember that at the core of this issue and at the core of providing ebooks, it's an access nature. So even though ebooks and new digital technologies can seem new or something that people didn't initially sign up for, ultimately it is tied into those core values of libraries and that many librarians share to help with that. Another issue that managers need to be aware of is the digital divide and digital inclusion. And again, once again, remembering that this is not something that simply affects their patrons, but also their staff. As there continue to be more millennials entering the workforce, studies show that typically these individuals who have grown up with technology tend to be a little bit more comfortable with implementing it, tend to be a little bit more excited about it. But again, it's also important to not generalize. There are plenty of older librarians who are excited about change, just as there are younger librarians who are hesitant about using these services. And so therefore, it's important that within multi-generational workforces, collaboration between digital natives and digital immigrant professionals may be particularly important, especially as libraries seek to serve users across a broad generational spectrum. So once again, having a workforce that reflects the varied needs of the community is ultimately an asset, and they'll be able to learn from each other and learn how best to serve the varied needs of patrons who may have varying levels of comfort or experience with this technology. Assessment and training is also key. It is important to ensure that those who are working with patrons to access digital information and to access ebooks are able to have access to the resources they need. Heidi Blackburn, in her paper about millennials and adopting technology, notes that smooth transitions and the implementation of technology benefit greatly from plenty of hands-on learning and continuing education after the initial adoption. So perhaps some staff time and access to e-reading devices that maybe they are not familiar with. For instance, somebody uses an iPad at home but is not as familiar with Kindles. Anna Shelton also notes that some strategies include creating easily accessible and clear troubleshooting guides for staff, and to ensure that time is built in for training and practice to make sure that these staff members are effectively able to serve library users. And finally, with communication, and not just in terms of what services are offered and how best to help patrons access this information, but to address the feelings staff may have about the ways that new technology impacts their work. Change is not always welcome in organizations, and managers need to be adept at understanding how the emotions of their staff may play into their need to manage change. In her research on change communication and eco-style communication, Petra Jurin notes that by recognizing and managing team members' emotions, one can alleviate their fears and anxieties, and it can help the staff to cope with ongoing change. So once again, noting that empathy is an important tool for managers to help manage change. So in conclusion, although great strides have been made over the last decade in ensuring patrons have access to digital resources and ebooks, it's important to remember that change is not a destination, but rather a process. By using change management skills to guide the implementation of ebook services, managers can help ensure better service to library users and ensure that their staff is prepared to help these library users access library resources. So to leave you with a couple questions to think about this issue. So change is a new constant for libraries. How can managers help staff stay up to date and be comfortable with new ebook platforms? What kind of communication might you use to help manage negative feelings and frustration of staff? And also, ease of access to resources is important for users to fully partake in digital offerings. What further role can managers play in ensuring that ebooks and digital resources are available but also easy to use? So once again, thanks so much for listening to my presentation, and I look forward to viewing yours.